You know, I think fishing has been in my blood since I was born. It must have been, because my mother tells me that I was overdue as a baby, and she would walk the shoreline of Goldstream Park in Victoria, wondering when I was going to actually make my debut into this world. So she thinks that I was somehow talking to the fish. As my birthday's in November, there was a lot of salmon in the river, and so after I was born, there was limited opportunities when we were really young, but in 1978, our family was able to afford and purchase a boat, which was a 22-foot fiberglass boat, which we used as our vacation in the summertime, our thing to do in the weekend. We were on it all of the time. And I spent many, many days, weekends, out with my father and mother and brother and sister fishing on that boat when I was young. My mother worked for a marina in Victoria, and at that marina there was a charter boat that would go out fishing every single day in the summertime. And so it would go out in the morning and go out in the afternoon. And I think what I would say was my daycare for many days in my childhood. I would go down, I would board this charter boat with about 30 passengers who were sport fishermen, and we would go out off of Victoria fishing for the morning and then the afternoon. And in that time I would bait hooks, clean fish, untangle lines, and generally just try and help people. After high school, gone up and worked in Haida Gwaii, on the west side of Haida Gwaii, on a remote mothership type of sports fishing operation. And there I learned about general fishing practices in the north, mostly cut plug herring fishing, which is pretty common around the Campbell River area. And we would fish in some interesting conditions out there. So relationships on the coast are really what have built this business for us. Whether it's, again, customers, crew members, communities, there's a real connection that our family feels with the First Nation communities. So much so that in the Haida Gwaii area, we were able to get to know many different individuals who worked with us up in Haida Gwaii and who had good, long-standing, deep-rooted connections with the communities in Haida Gwaii. And so much so that in 2010, I was adopted into the Haida Nation's Skidans clan, the Eagle clan, which was a fantastic experience for me and for our children to see and to be part of living culture. Very early on, when I was preteen, the charter boat I spoke of earlier that I would go fishing on was actually captained by a Songhees First Nations man. His name was Tor Miller. And at the time, he was both a commercial fisherman and he was also integrated into the sport fishing industry as well because he was a captain of a large sports fishing vessel. I learned a lot of stuff from him. He was a fantastic personal mentor. He was one of the most well-known, respected people in Victoria at the time is how I remember him. And he was very sweet. He was very considerate, very caring. He had amazing stories from his childhood and stories that were both sometimes difficult to share, I'm sure, but a lot of fun. A lot of fun happened back in the days, right? And he would have a lot of, you could see he would really enjoy sharing a lot of the stories that happened when he was younger. One of my favorite stories was beside his old double-end cod fishing boat, which was called the Torhaven, and sitting on the dock right beside his boat was something that I would see him work on tirelessly. And he'd be repairing and fixing cracks and what appeared to be like this old wooden boat. And it wasn't until my later years I realized that the canoe, he would have so many stories about him traveling through the San Juans, across to the mainland, up and down Vancouver Island. This was an original dugout Songhees canoe that his grandmother left him. And this was a very important living, working artifact of the coast, which really inspired me to look into other aspects of First Nations culture because I witnessed it. We are built on a barge, which is mobile. We can move it pretty much anywhere on the coast. We choose to operate out of the Celtic First Nation territory in the central coast of BC. We operate at a place called Millbank Sound or St. John's Harbour. This is a location which is very convenient to get into from Vancouver. Our logistics are clean. We fly helicopters from Bella Bella into the lodge. And then, if there's things that we need, we're still fairly close to a local community where we can draw from their expertise, labor, folks that want to come and help us. We can provision ourselves from their community as well. We are an 1,100-ton, 15,000 square foot building floating in the middle of nowhere. We have 17 guest rooms, all with soaker tubs, showers, very comfortable lounges, rooms. We have a sauna, we have a steam room, we have a hot tub, a plunge pool, wonderful culinary team with a great dining room with the best view in British Columbia. But on top of the main facilities, we also have another 24 boats, sport fishing boats that we'll take with us. We have rescue lifeboats, and we have docks, infrastructure, all of those things that are required to support really every municipal service that you might expect to have. On board, we are fully self-contained. We have fuel storage, generator for power. We have water maker systems. We have septic systems. We have freezers for food and food preparation, workshops, outboard repair, you name it. We have to keep everything on board and in great working order. So under our current business model, where we're pretty much exclusive to sport fishing, we spend about 90 to 100 days in the central coast of BC, and the rest of the time we're either in transit or we're at moorage down in the Campbell River area. Our activities in the summertime are, of course, once you're actually up and running, really, it's kind of like just keeping fuel in the tank. The staff know what to do. The guests know what to do. They're there for a great time, a good time. Everybody knows what to do. It's just this living entity that you need to keep fed and fueled, of course. The real work for us is in the wintertime, making sure that everything is safe, well-maintained, in perfect shape, because we need to take what is essentially cold ocean barges. We need to turn those into a very high-end customer experience in a very quick, short amount of time. We bring the facilities down to Campbell River. We can access both a lift, so like a dry dock. If we need to lift the facilities out of the water to maintain the bottom, we can weld, we can paint, we can clean, and inspect for safety reasons. We have safe moorage here just north of Campbell River. And the main thing is that we can access great suppliers to help us out. And we contribute annually about $1.5 million to the community.
like you needed a drink. Cheers, Scotch.
Oh, well, thank you.
You telling your stories again? Is this guy filling you with a lot of stories? Yeah, you got to be careful with the information he gives you. He's very believable. I know this because I've worked with him for the last couple of years. So this one time, we were actually up Millbank Sound. We hopped on the Glendevon. I believe your kids were with us, Fisher and Hunter. So he likes to tell me a lot of information because I'm from Alberta. I'm new to oceans, fishing, and boats. I don't know what I'm talking about, so I rely on him for proper information. So this one time, we're on the Glendevon. We're cruising to the inlets to go up to Millbank Sound, and through this one inlet, we passed like 40 whales.
Oh yeah.
So you look out in the distance. It's a nice, beautiful, sunny day. You watch for the spouts, and you see the whales with binoculars. So he starts asking me like information, like, oh, what do you see out there? I'm like, oh, I see all these whales. What do they look like? I'm like, oh, well, like you see the hump going down like this. Like, well, what does the tail look like? Oh, it's sticking straight up like this. Like, oh, that's a straight tail whale. I'm like, oh, really? I didn't know there's such thing as a straight tail whale. And then at the end of the weekend, Fisher comes down in the morning, decides to tell him, he's like, Brian, I got to tell you something. I'm like, what? There's no such thing as straight tail whales. I'm like, what?
The hardest thing about operating a sports fishing lodge is not what most people would think. The day-to-day operations in the summertime when we're actually up and running, it's always different, and there's always different challenges that you're facing. We deal with 60 outboard engines, 4 generators, refrigeration systems, barges, we deal with boats, equipment, electronics, radios, satellite communication, internet, all of these things. And any one of those things can break down at any time. I would say the hardest thing that we have dealing with the overall business is just maintaining certainty of operation for us to be able to continue moving forward. And things like regulation changes, the access to resources, those sort of things that we're all maybe a little bit unsure of how those look going into the future. That's what keeps me awake at night. Something that might have something to do with climate change, right? Those sort of larger picture things are the biggest risk, I would say, to our type of enterprise rather than the actual day-to-day running of operations. So the future of the lodge really lies in what people have as expectations in their free time and what they would like to do for vacations. When I first was in this business, as I said earlier, I was baiting hooks and cutting fish and cleaning gear and whatnot. When I used to ask guests, this is going back many decades now, is how was your trip? Their instant response was, oh, I got my limit. I'm like, okay, but how was your trip? Well, I got my limit. It's like, but the rest of it? Oh, yeah, it was okay. That's changed now, right? So much so that even in our marketing for our company, we don't talk about limits. What we really need for our business long-term is expectation and opportunity. And expectation and opportunity is that something, if somebody were to come up fishing with us, they can go out, their expectation is that they can go out and if they catch a fish, they can catch a fish and they can keep that fish. That's very important to a lot of people, especially somebody who's a first-time angler. They want to keep that fish. And then we have anglers who want to go and provide fish to their family, and others who come up and they like to catch a fish, but they don't really want to kill that fish or keep it, so they let it go. So the future for our business is really the changing interests of people. People value now, much more than I believe they used to, the outdoor experience. They'll come up, and I think a good example was, I had these guests that were out fishing with us, and I was so excited because we caught a couple of fish in the morning. They wanted to spend the rest of the day looking at sea otters. And I thought to myself, this is interesting. I'm witnessing something, I'm witnessing a change in me. I'm actually appreciating what these folks are seeing here right now. I've never spent 2 or 3 hours watching sea otters or touring around, and it's all been so, I've always taken it for granted. And so when I think of the future of a business like this, a future for the lodge, I see a tremendous potential because people love getting out to the outdoors, and they love seeing wildlife, and they love seeing the environment, heightened awareness of the environment and where we operate on the Mid-Coast. It is absolutely beautiful. So I think there's a very positive future available for businesses like this. And although we've seen changes over the years with fish populations, with area, say, restrictions or changes and how access and opportunity is impacted by regulation, there's still plenty of opportunity out there to enjoy the wilderness and to get out in an acceptable way on the coast of BC. So a large part of our operations focus on on-water activities. So if we're out fishing or we're doing tours, whale watching, those sort of things, we have to make sure that we're on the water safely. And so maintenance on our boats is a huge responsibility. With over 30 boats, you have to imagine we have over 60 engines, VHF radios, depth sounders, radars, all of these different systems. And as best equipment that we can possibly afford and to provide, if you don't maintain it, it breaks down. So what we do is in the wintertime, we make sure that all the boats are brought into storage and we go through all of our systems. And it's not just to keep things looking pretty, which they are a nice looking fleet of aluminum boats, but it's also to make sure that cables, steering systems, anything that can break down or cause a stressful situation or hopefully not an emergency situation on the water is rectified before it happens. So I asked my grandmother about a tartan that was on the wall, and I recognized it because it was on the same kitchen wall in the house that I grew up in with my parents. And of course, I asked her, was that the Cuthbert tartan from Scotland? And she had replied that yes, it was, she thought, and it seemed interesting, so I inquired more. And as it turned out, her and my grandfather went back to Scotland and asked about the Cuthbert heritage and explained some history that they knew of and some documents and everything. And as it turned out, the historian had shared with her, well, you were known as Scottish, but you weren't exactly the Cuthberts he thought we were. Apparently we were known as border clan Scots, and were somewhat banished for being sheep thieves of all things. So I went home and I told my father this story, and he was outraged. He was absolutely outraged, and that I was never to mention this again, and it was all totally untrue until he spoke with his own mother to find out that this was the case. So when we first started the company, we were short one boat, and so my parents had offered to help us finance and to find another boat. They helped us with that, and so they purchased this particular boat. And after restoring it after the first year, putting new engines on it, a new paint job and everything, my dad was super excited about it. So he asked, George, can you tell me about the boat? How's it looking? What's going on with it? And did you name it? So I said, yeah, of course. I put it all together and it's looking really good. I snapped a photo of it, and right across the visor, the name is the Sheep Thief. Of course. By then it was worthy of a good joke. And this turned into one of our luckiest boats on the water. This boat was absolutely a favorite thing for my mom and dad to be out on the water, and often, you know, I'm sure just together fishing and whatnot. My mother had actually caught a very large salmon that won the largest tournament on southern Vancouver Island, and that was the Juan de Fuca Invitational. And when I was up north at a fishing lodge, we had very slow internet service, and I remember being slightly irritated that somebody was sending me a photograph, and it took several minutes at $5 a minute to download. And when I finally got the photograph, it was a picture of my mom with a check for $20,000 for catching a big fish in a salmon tournament, right? So she got the big fish, and it was really funny because when my parents were fishing on this together, my dad had caught a fish, and of course, you don't have to keep every fish, so it was about a 15-pounder, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna let that one go, right? And so the next time the fishing rod went down, he went for it, and as I understand it, she elbowed him in the belly, took the rod, and she goes, you're not letting this one go, and that was the fish that caught and won the tournament. The boats are typically transported from here up to Port Hardy, and depending on our service with the BC Ferries, we'll either put them onto BC Ferries and have them taken up to Bella Bella, They've been very helpful, or depending on like tourist traffic, we may have to run them. We will put them in the water at Port Hardy and then have our guide crew jump on and run the boats. It's about 3.5 hours to get them up to the lodge location. We have 3 different barges ranging from 100 to 130, 40 feet long. The combined weight of these facilities is close to 2,000 tons. We're towed by tugboats, sometimes in tandem or sometimes in single, and we'll actually mobilize from our winter storage location in Campbell River, where we'll tow our facilities up to the central coast of BC. Any coastal business, it seems we're all having challenges, whether it's in the forestry sector, commercial fishing, aquaculture, any of our industries on the coast are constantly evolving. And so I think with fishing lodges, as much as we want to try and maintain the spirit of the fishing lodge that I was aware of when I first got in the business back in the mid and late 80s, it has changed, and it is more reflective of, I think, a lot of today's values that people are more aware of, and that is with respect to climate change and the environment. And so what I'm seeing is a bit of a shift from our guests' interest in actually catching and keeping a fish, although they do like to do that, there's no doubt about it, is the things that they're more aware of and the things that they are learning more about before they get to the lodge. And that is elements of the environment. Whether we will continue to be able to catch as many fish today as we are going to be able to in, say, 20 years, we already have changes now that are in place relative to 20 years ago.